Hello everybody, my name is Florie Freshman and I'm doing a reading of my father's book, From Misery to Happiness by George Freshman, and the life of a Holocaust survivor. And this photo was taken, I had it blown up here by an American soldier in 1945, a few weeks after liberation, April 29th, 1945, age 19. And he passed away at age 91 on April 4th, 2017. And he left a few things out of this book, but it is in chronological order, so I put those items that he left out in a painting, which I will show you another day, and wanted to read here from his book. So it's very inspiring for me to start reading from his book. I would start on the very beginning, so I'll just read from the middle, page 37. I would later come to realize that the officer in charge of the selection that day was none other than Dr. Joseph Mengele, who regularly searched among the incoming prisoners for sets of twins on whom he would carry out a number of sadistic studies and experiments. Mengele was nicknamed the Angel of Death for the many people, especially children, he tortured and had sent to their deaths. As it was, I never stepped foot inside of Auschwitz. Those of us, quote, lucky enough to have been selected for work were immediately loaded back onto the cattle cars and transported to Vaihingen concentration camp in Germany, where we worked for about 3 months defusing unexploded Allied bombs. And he told me there was a special tool they had, which I saw actually in a video, and I have to recreate it. It's amazing that the German soldiers had the tool to disarm the American bombs. I guess they had the same kind of bombs. As it was, here, the atmosphere in the camp was inescapably tense. We worked in constant fear of detonating rather than disabling the bombs. Sometimes the explosive devices would indeed become triggered, and as a result many prisoners lost their lives while working at Vaihingen. I was immeasurably fortunate during this time to be one who was quite naturally adept with my hands. Where others were challenged by the work, and dangerously so, I was able to execute the specific tasks involved with no grave consequences. From Vaihingen, we were marched 5 miles east to Unterexingen. We resided in the labor camp at Unterexingen, for several months, working construction before marching 35 miles north to Kochendorf. There we were put to work in the salt mines, digging out areas where German soldiers could shield themselves from Allied bombs. It was difficult work because there was no food and very little water, a situation aggravated by the salt in the air which caused constant thirst. We sang Jewish songs quietly as we worked to buoy our spirits. At one point, one of the men tried to escape. He was captured and brought back to the camp, where he was ordered to kneel down in front of us and shot in the back of the head. The SS men actually showed disappointment that his scalp hadn't blown off, as had happened during other executions. My hope for survival was growing dim. The feeling among prisoners was one of total isolation, having no real concept of what was happening in the outside world. It was at this time that my faith began to waver. I was hungry and cold. I missed my mother and my siblings terribly. I had seen friends beaten, shot, and hung. Through all this misery, I had prayed and prayed. Not once were my prayers answered. After Germany defied the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin changed tracks, endorsing the Allies in their renewed effort to drive out the Nazis. In the summer of 1944, the Soviets unleashed a major offensive that included the liberation of the Majdanek concentration camp in eastern Poland. By late January 1945, Auschwitz too had been liberated. In an effort to keep their remaining prisoners from falling into enemy hands and telling their stories to Allied and Soviet liberators, the Nazis began a succession of brutal death marches designed to move us from the camps and subcamps toward the interior of the Reich. But of course, as prisoners, we were not privy to such information. We knew little beyond that of our own narrow and pathetic existence, much less what might lurk behind the Nazis' motivation to herd us like animals from one miserable camp to the next. And so it was in February 1945, as the Soviets continued their rapid advance from the east and the Allies from the west, we were once again sent marching. Dachau concentration camp was 172 miles from Kochendorf. To say this was a long, difficult journey doesn't begin to express the abject misery, the utter hopelessness we felt during this time. While walking in only our striped uniforms, we were given nothing to eat or drink. When we were allowed to stop and rest, usually at night, the Germans would distribute a little food and water, but of course far less than what was adequate. Once they handed out heavily salted potatoes, and in our desperation we ate what was given. Our thirst became so severe that many of us, including myself, felt compelled to drink from the sewers. It was bitterly cold, making it difficult, even dangerous, to fall asleep during rest periods. Those laden by illness or who otherwise could not keep up were shot down in the road. Early on in the trip, a man walking beside me became agitated. He started to cry, talking about his children and worried that the soldiers were going to shoot him because he was having trouble keeping pace. I felt for this man, and his story brought to the surface many of my own buried emotions. Tearing up, I slowed my pace to remain beside him. But the guards wouldn't have it. As was their custom, when they spotted anyone lagging behind, they chased us. In response, we ran, as was required if you didn't want to be gunned down on the spot. The Nazis never supplied us with adequate footwear. Most often we were given shoes that were either too small, too big, or that consisted of two lefts or two rights. On this particular march, I was wearing wooden shoes that were too large for my feet. While running to catch up with the rest of the group, I lost one of them and was left with one useless wooden shoe. To this day, I suffer pain in one of my legs as a result of walking with only one shoe for the remainder of the trip. I will continue another time on the bottom of page 40. Thank you so much. And I'm very honored that you listened to the portion of my dad's book, From Misery to Happiness by George Freshman. Thank you so much. This is Floris Rena Freshman signing off. Thank you so much.